أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا ونبينا أبي القاسم محمد وعلى آله الطيبين الطاهرين أما بعد. When one examines the lives of the great saints, you find that isolation is something which has been a part and parcel of their lives. When you look at the life of Amir al-Mu'mineen, for example, and you study the events in the life of the Imam, you'll find that there was a portion of the life of the Imam that he spent in isolation. After the death of the Prophet, Amir al-Mu'mineen would confine himself to his home. He would compile the Quran and he would work on God's holy book. The Imam, he describes this period when he says, فَصَبَرْتُ وَفِي الْعَيْنِ قَدًا وَفِي الْحَلْكِ شَجًا. He says, I was patient, even though it's as if there was a prickling in my eye and there was a suffocation in my throat. The Imam, he spent this time in isolation. When you look at the life of Rasulullah, you find Rasulullah often would isolate himself. He would go towards the cave of Hira. He would spend the month of Ramadan in particular within that cave, just him and his Lord in communison. This year, due to the situation caused by COVID-19, we won't be able to gather in the remembrance of Jannatul Baqee. But the fact that we're not able to gather doesn't prohibit us and doesn't prevent us from remembering these individuals in Jannatul Mu'alla and Jannatul Baqee. These individuals like the Imams who are buried there, the individuals like Fatimatul Zahra, the individuals like the Lady Khadija and Abu Talib alayhi salam. When you look at the life of Rasulullah, indeed, one of the most significant examples of isolation is that period which the Prophet spent in the Sha'b or the valley of Abu Talib. It's recorded in history that as the message of Islam grew, and many of the children of Quraysh and those individuals began to accept Islam, the efforts by Quraysh to stop the prophetic message, it increased. They would try whatever means they could do to stop this message, but it continued to grow, until a point had come where they got and gathered amongst each other. They said to each other that now the time has come that upon Abu Talib and the children of Abu Talib and Banu Hashim in totality, we are going to have a complete social and economic blockade. That no one is allowed to marry with them, no one is allowed to buy from them, no one is allowed to sell to them. There will be a complete blockade unless they hand over the Prophet Muhammad so we can kill him. You find that in this period, it was Abu Talib who takes the Muslims into his valley. And it is from the wealth of Abu Talib and the wealth of Khadija that the Muslims, they survived this period of isolation. There was such difficulties that many of the Quraysh, they say, that as we would walk past the valley of Abu Talib, we could hear the hunger of the children. A point had come where the situation had reduced to the point that they would have to eat leaves to survive. You see, isolation was something which caused Islam to flourish in a sense, that these times of perseverance, it gave the Muslims of that time a backbone. And in the same way, even though we are in isolation today, this strength which we have is one which will flourish, especially in the movement of Al-Baqee. And indeed, another individual who would spend a portion of our life in isolation was none other than Fatimatul Zahra. You see, Fatimatul Zahra, She would go after the death of the Prophet. She would take her children, Imam Hassan and Imam al Hussein. On the outskirts of Medina, she would sit underneath a tree and she would weep at that spot. Amir al Mu'mineen would build that house known as Baytul Huzn. And she would go and she would isolate herself with her children and cry in that house. The memory of Baqee is the memory of Fatimatu Zahra Salamullahi alayha. And those who crash with these personalities like Sayyida Zahra, you find these individuals perish, but the remembrance of these divine saints, they remain. The remembrance of God remains. You know, it's stated after that period in the valley of Abu Talib that when the Quraysh had finally decided to lift this blockade, that treaty which they wrote upon about the blockade, everything had been eaten by termites except for the name of Allah. This goes to show kullu shay'in fan, that everything is to perish except for his face. And that is what we say today, that these individuals who opposed those divine saints buried in Baqee, their names will perish, but the remembrance of Jannatul Baqee will remain. The remembrance of Zahra will remain. And the remembrance of a lady like Ummul Baneen will remain. That Ummul Baneen who sacrificed her son Abbas. You know which Abbas was this? This was that Aba Fadl Abbas. That once in history it's recorded during the time of Sayyid Mahdi Bahar al-Ulum, that water had come to the grave of Abbas. So they requested the Sayyid to give advice at this time. As he was there within the shrine of Abbas, a man, he said to him, O Sayyid Mahdi, I have one question for you. You would say that Abbas was a very tall individual, but why is the grave of Abbas so small? Sayyid Baharul Ulum replies by saying, Oh man, I wish you didn't ask me that question. He takes off his turban. He says that the grave of Abbas is that martyr that not only did they cut the neck and the arms of Abbas, but they broke the body of Abbas into pieces. With this memory of Aba Fadl Abbas and Ummul Baneen, we continue our movement for the rebuilding of Jannatul Baqee.